Welcome to the Hedgehog Watchdog podcast. I'm Devin Saxon, joined by Greg Baldwin. We're the dream team behind Libertarian Party of South Dakota and South Dakotans Against Prohibition. Today's episode is brought to you by Pinkcoin. You can check them out at pinkcoin.com. Special guest today, the former chair of the Libertarian Party of Minnehaha County and the deputy director of Americans for Prosperity, Lisa Marie Nolen. How you doing today, Lisa?
Good. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me plug this in, then I'll tell you. I'm good. And did you know that when you greet somebody on Messenger now, they're saying you should show your hands.
Oh, really?
Yeah, then it means that people can trust you. Because back in caveman days, you had to have your hands out in front of you.
Yeah, isn't that like how the handshake originated?
Must be.
People would show their hands and then shake hands or something.
Yeah, that checks out. Yeah, so that's what they say when you are on video. You're supposed to like do a lot of this, not this, because that's just.
So you're saying when those weirdos just wave at you in Messenger, that's a good thing?
Yeah. It's considerate.
So yeah, today we got three subjects: civil asset forfeiture, educational freedom, and occupational licensing. Which ones do you guys want to tackle first?
I think libertarians have a saying that taxation is theft, but when it comes to theft, I don't think there's any theft greater than civil asset forfeiture.
I have to agree. Yeah. So I'll say one thing recently that I heard somebody talking about. You don't have to be anti-police when you're talking about civil asset forfeiture because a lot of people don't even like it. And so he's going on and talking about how we don't want to make policemen predators because just they don't necessarily want the things that they're having to do with civil asset forfeiture either.
Right. Yeah. So let's see here. I guess we can move. I got this link from Argus Leader on standby where they were talking about the civil asset forfeiture bill from last year. So I suppose we could.
Yeah, for those listening in, we had one in South Dakota, a bill last year, but it failed to make it out of committee, didn't it?
We should start with what civil asset forfeiture is for people that don't know. A bill that would remove move money and property seized by law enforcement from civil to criminal proceedings. So
go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. Give us a lowdown on what civil asset forfeiture is, Lisa, for those that don't know.
Sounds good. So with civil asset forfeiture, the intent of it that they had started was that you would pull somebody over and you find out they were trafficking and you'd be whatever they used in assets in that crime. So whether it be a car, cash, proceeds from drug sales, that money would be seized. They put it all into something called a drug control fund, and then they use that for different things. Like they'll even show sometimes how they award it. I can't remember what county it was, but they had like it was like a tank or at least a more armored car. They do use that in things like in South Dakota, at least. They use that when they're trying to do other deals. To kind of set somebody up and catch drug trafficking charges, then they would use that as well. So it's one of the things that they are kind of protective on here in South Dakota because there's obviously a benefit to that, for us here, for law enforcement in the state. Mm-hmm. But the intent of it was to stop drug trafficking, or at least not allow for those things that help drug trafficking to be on the street. And in South Dakota, we actually are D-. We're the worst in the nation on civil asset forfeiture by Institute for Justice standards. And a big piece is we have a criminal process that goes this way, and you might have a public defender for that. But on the civil side, your public defender can't come over here and.
So that kind of complicates things when your attorney can't do your civil case and your criminal case.
So essentially, if you're poor or of little means, you have no way to actually defend yourself because
Yeah.
lawyers don't generally work pro bono.
Yes. And yeah, that's exactly right. And so you have a criminal case going this way, a civil case going this way. This bill in South Dakota would take and put them together. So your stuff would follow you, and that would ensure due process. So the biggest issue with civil asset forfeiture is just the unconstitutionality. I mean, I'm saying that to you guys, but you already know that. But that's what it would do, is it would bring that together into a little more of a due process, and it would require conviction. So you can look on there too. Right now, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think that's the least they could do is require criminal conviction, because without a criminal conviction, you really haven't proven anything. And civil court, as you mentioned, is way different than criminal court. When you're going to civil court, that's not a jury of your peers, is it? That I'm aware of. That's just a judge.
Just a judge, yeah.
And you can't, there's actually a really good story. I'll see if I can put it together, but I transcribed out Sam Nelson's testimony last year when this went through. A lawyer here in Sioux Falls, and he was talking about a guy that he was defending. And he was saying this is one of those occurrences where he was hired for this guy, and he could both defend him for both of those, and saw how difficult it really was for both, because you'd have the civil court case held up for the criminal and vice versa, and it was just a mess. They really wanted to kind of bring down the amount of the charges, because there is something that they've started to watch constitutionality-wise, where your value of what whatever the crime was, there has to be some relationship to the value of the crime and the value of the stuff. So it was just one other piece that they kept finagling on, and it was just kind of a nightmare. And I'll tell you.
Want to listen to it? Should we listen to it?
You can. It's pretty darn good, but I don't remember. Oh, you have the timing set up to that one?
I don't have the timing set up, but I can pull up the link and go to the time if we know what the timestamp is.
Okay, that sounds good. Otherwise, I haven't transcribed. I can link out too. But basically, the process was terrible. I don't know what the result was, but it was a guy that was a farmer, and they seized his semi for a personal use amount of meth. And that's something where a treatment thing would have been more helpful than seizing that semi that he needed to earn a living. And it wasn't a keen amount. So it's a really compelling testimony when he talks about that too. But he walks through that whole process pretty well and says, how that's pretty broken. So what happens often is that people just abandon their stuff. They just sign it over.
Yeah, that's a pretty expensive piece of property, a semi truck, to have that taken over. It's just a little amount of drugs is insane, I think.
Yeah, so that's something that there was just a Supreme Court decision this year on a few different points of the constitutionality of it. But that's a problem, the way that it follows that process, that you can't defend it. And so what happens is I had talked to somebody else also out in Rapid City, Spearfish area, that said they pretty much kind of set this table up, at Sturgis outside the jail, and people, come in from out of state and they catch a drug charge or something, could be even something small, and then they go to take their vehicles from them, and then they go to the courthouse and they basically sit there and negotiate for their stuff. So they pay a certain amount. If you pay us this much, you can keep your vehicle. And so they pay, a certain amount, and they actually publish that. If you, if it's fast to pull up the link, you can actually see it took, every day or every week of Sturgis.
Yeah, that's something you kind of would hear about as a joke for like Mexico or something, where you get pulled over and you've got to pay a bribe, and essentially what you just described is essentially that to me. They stole your property and then you had to pay them to get it back.
Yeah. And you don't have to have it, like you were saying earlier, the least you could do is require a conviction. The other thing is it doesn't have to be your car or your stuff. So you could be driving, somebody just used the example, you could be driving grandma's car and you could get that seized, and it wouldn't matter to them that it's theirs versus yours.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's terrible. I remember reading an article a couple years ago where they used that civil asset forfeiture in Aberdeen up there too, where I was originally from, and somebody had gotten busted with a small amount of narcotics. I don't remember what it was, but they were, going to seize his car.
Yeah.
And to me, it just didn't make any sense because it's like a person's car is their their mode of transportation to work. If
Mhm.
they've got kids or whatever, I mean, you're taking somebody's car and they didn't even, and it wasn't even a case of like dealing drugs or anything. It was literally just they got pulled over, they
Mhm.
found something in their car, and then they took that person's car. And that ain't right to me.
Yeah. Well, I've got the whole legislative audio thing, but it's like 2 hours long. So, I mean, we could try. I'm not sure where exactly about when that defense attorney was testifying or
He was right at the end of proponent testimony because he wasn't actually like we didn't know he was
right.
going to speak even. So that was kind of a nice.
Was he like the last one before Roundsberg went up to speak?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I know when Roundsberg comes up.
Okay.
So I'll go a little bit before that.
Okay.
Maybe like 10 minutes before that or something. Let's see, 143. So we need 133.
And link it if you want to, because Lee McGrath does a testimony from Institute for Justice, and that's insanely informational in a short amount of time because he was doing it in testimony.
All right, let's see here. This works.
Is
it not?
It too?
Why is it not playing?
And the law enforcement professionals in Union County and the 2 officers we have in the Alcester Police Department work very, very hard on the drug cases in that town. We have a lot of them. I wholeheartedly support this.
Is this the right guy? Maybe he's coming up next.
Bill, based on some experience that I've had with court appointments and with retained. And I want to first share with you my court-appointed experience. I had a young man who, kind of like the Timms case, had a very nice car that he'd worked hard to purchase. And unfortunately, he was addicted to methamphetamine. And I'd echo Mr. Hager's comments. A lot of the forfeitures that I see are not people that are profiting off of the sale of drugs. They are victims of an addiction to a drug. This young man had his automobile seized, and the total fine amount of all the charges that he was charged with before we entered a plea agreement, which is typical where a number of the charges are reduced, was about the same as the value of the vehicle. And so I take that back to the Timms case to tell you that in order to show that there's a great disparity that to stop the forfeiture, that's tough to do when you look at the maximum number of charges that a person's charged with. And I don't fault prosecutors for that. They need to bring every charge they can, and that's a practice method that's accepted and effective. But this young man asked me, well, I bought this car. I needed to get to work. I'm going to need to get it. I needed to get to meetings with my probation officer. I'm going to need it to get it to treatment. And my answer, unfortunately, because I was court appointed and I could only help him on the criminal side, is I can't help you, man. I'm not allowed to appear in civil court in this county and help you on this. I'm not allowed to do that. My contract with the county doesn't allow me to do that. And that's just the way it was. The other case, fortunately, I was retained on that, and it was in Minnehaha County. A gentleman who was in his 60s, who's a farmer who I've known for some time, fell into a methamphetamine addiction. And I would, as a brief aside, I'd tell you, you would be very surprised at the age and profession of some people that are starting to use methamphetamine. This gentleman had been driving in Minnehaha County. He was pulled over. They found methamphetamine in his pocket and a little bit of marijuana in the glove box of his semi. They seized his semi for asset forfeiture. And so now he's got me retained to help him on a number of charges, and he's got me helping him in the criminal realm, and he's got me helping him in the civil realm. I am dealing with a prosecutor from the Attorney General's office, and I'm dealing with a prosecutor from Minnehaha. Both those offices are very busy, and their time to liaison between each other is very limited. I've also got 2 judges because of the way Minnehaha is set up. They've got the judges that are assigned primarily criminal duties, and then they've got the judges that are assigned civil duties. So we're working 2 things at the same time, and we've got kind of a chicken before the egg problem because I have to continually delay the civil matter while we're trying to work out the criminal process. Very frustrating, very expensive for him. And this is a guy who uses that semi on his farm for his livelihood. And he is a personal level possessor of methamphetamine, nothing at all related to distribution. And he got hooked because of the language in our current statute that allows him to have his assets forfeited because of the transportation piece. In speaking with the attorney's office, they came up with a valuation number. And I said, well, I value it at this. I'm trying to get value above and beyond what the maximum fine amount is so I can make some kind of case for the forfeiture being inappropriate. And I said, how did you come up with this value that is conveniently very close to the maximum fine level that could be awarded in this case? And the answer was we looked at the charges, and we had one of our highway patrolmen look on the internet for some values for this semi and the trailer. I bring that to your attention because I understand how our law is written and how it can be used. And I'm here to tell you that the philosophy behind the current statute, I don't think was followed in that case. And the final comment I want to make on this is I get that we need to and we should use the assets of folks that are breaking our laws and that are causing people that I represent to become addicted to drugs. I think if we seize those things from drug dealers, we ought to use those to finance law enforcement efforts. I wholeheartedly support that. I got a family that lives here and kids that are growing up here. But we are not doing anything for the large number of people that lose assets and end up a leg down and a couple more steps behind when they're trying to get treatment, work with the probation officer, and get their life back on track. And those of you that have practiced in the criminal realm or sat on the bench, I think you know that oftentimes when we deal with methamphetamine, we need more than one try before we get on the wagon and stay on it. So I appreciate very much you listening to me. I appreciate Senator Rush's bringing the bill, and I think it makes our state better while preserving some things that are important to us.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for your testimony.
All right.
Not fast. Okay, so what do you guys notice about it? I mean, like, what do you guys hear? Because I've listened to it like a bazillion times because I think it's so fast. Like, I just think it's such a good story. So I've pulled a lot of different pieces from it. But what, like, hearing it for the first time, what do you find really compelling in it?
I just think it's insane how you can take someone's semi truck over a little bit of drugs in their glove compartment. I mean, and then how they charge you the value of your car to get your car back. So you're essentially just buying your car back from the police.
Mm-hmm.
And then all that money goes to, like, I noticed on the Attorney General site, they don't really show where any of the money goes to. So it's kind of like completely unregulated on how that money's spent and what it's being used for. And
well, I think if you want to talk about addiction, I think the state's probably addicted to that money, you know, because it's untaxed money. It's not coming out of the general fund. They don't need to fight for it. They don't need to, it's free money to them. So I think the program's probably abused because, once you realize we can make all this money. And,
yeah.
And what happened is, I think that's so fascinating too, because when proponent testimony is done, and opponent testimony starts, you guys played Roundsburg. Was it last week or the week before?
Yeah, we can play it again if you want.
Yeah, where he goes like, there's this one really compelling point when I say compelling, I was just really surprised to hear it. not like compelling for them to convince them to say yes, but he went to each person on the committee and he broke down the counties in their district and how much money they got from civil asset forfeiture. And it just seemed just like not maybe
like
just not
threatening, kind of. That's what I thought it was, kind of threatening. Like,
yeah.
doesn't the Attorney General have sole discretion on how the money's spent for?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to put my headphones back in. But yeah, it's I don't remember. I think that because it doesn't go through appropriations or anything, it just is decided by the Attorney General's office, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, what is that Institute for Justice?
It's Reason.
Oh yeah. Okay, I'm gonna just go get my headphones quick because I left them underneath that water.
But yeah, they've got a good map here on which states letter grades are, and it looks like South Dakota, according to them, is even worse than a D-. It's an F.
Is it?
So, and you know what's interesting too? Sorry.
You're fine.
There are some states where the money actually stays in the district that they pull the assets in from, not like district or county. So that's even more of that, what we call like perverse incentives to say.
Isn't that South Dakota though?
South Dakota's they all come in and go back out to the Attorney General's office.
Because he went in that recording, he went county by county or whatever and was like, this is how much.
And he was saying this is how much was basically doled out from the Attorney General's office to
you.
And this is how much we gave to you, and here's how much we gave to you, to the counties in your district. So, but it wasn't that's how much came back in that they got to keep. It all came into the fund. And then one thing that happened with the bill last year is Senator Rush was carrying that, and he really wanted that to avoid any perverse incentives. So it was really coming from a good place, but he wanted to change any money that comes in civil asset forfeiture and put it all over to education. But that's hard. I mean, it makes it a little more difficult because you have appropriators that want to be able to determine where that money goes, because that's appropriators.
I mean, not even specifically civil asset forfeiture revenue, but when you're talking about revenue streams that fluctuate like that, I don't think we need to count on that for any services, or you know what I mean? Because because like you just said, perverse incentive. It's like, okay, well, so if we took in 1.5 million last year in civil asset forfeiture, well, geez, we got to do that at least this year, Otherwise, we're now underfunded.
What do you guys think about how they use the civil asset forfeiture money as drug buy money as part of the law enforcement investigations?
That's what they do. They do that here for that. And I don't know if I've got a huge say in how that money part of it is. The kind of militarization part of it, that I probably have a higher opinion on. But I don't know that, like, the morality of using it for drugs. What do you guys think?
Well, I think the drug war should be ended completely. So I don't think they should be using. I think it's just completely hypocritical for them to be buying drugs with drug money that they're taking from other people, and it's like that basically essentially is making you drug dealers. I mean, I know you're just trying to bust people, but you're buying drugs.
Add insult to injury, they when they bust them, they make them pay that money back too.
Wow.
But one thing I was going to say, how Devin touched on, how he's against the drug war in general, and I think we could all agree on that, is I think that's probably part of the problem when you listen to that guy's testimony. And sure, his testimony was good, but you saw how, well, I'm not against, and I think we should, and I'm totally in favor of, and I 100% support. And it's like, well, you're kind of sending a mixed message here, buddy. You're trying to say that you support this and you're all in favor of it, but yet you're now pointing out all these cases where, okay, so it's you get to be the arbitrator of that. The law just shouldn't exist. Let's push for that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what makes it a good testimony in South Dakota is because they have to see somebody. So for instance, I'm jumping ahead of myself with a second story. There was the guy who testified, and his whole thing, he's like, I am a staunch conservative. Like he said that on a totally different issue. That was the beginning of testimony, to say, I'm a staunch conservative. And then he went on to give his testimony. And the reason he did that is because in South Dakota, you have like that's who you're speaking to. So it's like they need to hear it from somebody that agrees with most of what they think and this. They have to like fit it in their frame view. So that's why it was good testimony in South Dakota. But he's not somebody who's necessarily going to say, like you're saying, that's going to say like libertarians, where we're like, this doesn't make sense. Like he's still legitimizing the other things, but that's where they connect with him. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, and I'm all in favor of, making progress. Like I get that it's not going to be 100% my way. I think sometimes though, by not pushing a little bit harder and a little bit farther, it's kind of like a negotiation in any other matter. You don't start at what you want. You know what I mean? You need to start a little higher than that, and then you'll negotiate down a little bit. Because you almost think that ending civil asset forfeiture or requiring a conviction is somehow radical.
Yeah.
Well, that's not even radical. Radical would be you just don't have a right to steal my property. And that was kind of one of my things I want to touch on about civil asset forfeiture is like, I'm 100% in favor of restitution to victims. And if that means seizing somebody's property because there was a victim of a crime or whatever, that's a whole, seizing a property to pay. Let's say something happened to somebody and you're liable for it and there was $100,000 hospital bill or something. And you own 3 houses, okay, well, that's, whatever. I mean, I'm in favor of victims, getting restitution, but the state is not a victim, although they like to play.
I've got a thought experiment for you, Greg. Let's say that you're on a highway in the middle of the night and you're driving to Pier and you accidentally hit somebody with your car. And then you call up 911, the sheriff shows up. And you tell the sheriff you don't know what you hit, and the sheriff doesn't really do much of an investigation to find out what you hit. And the sheriff's like, you know what? Why don't you borrow my personal vehicle and drive it on the pier?
Wait, I think I know where this is going.
So let's say that it turns out that you actually hit somebody, and that would be a crime, right? So wouldn't the sheriff borrowing that individual, Ravensborg, his personal vehicle, wouldn't that be a subject to civil asset forfeiture since it was used in the commission of a crime, kind of?
I guess I'm not sure if there's something written where it has to be drugs or can it be anything.
I actually have the Attorney General's definition up. Let's read it. Let's see what the Attorney General, who had committed vehicular manslaughter and is probably going to get away with it by the way things have been going. Let's see what he says.
What?
Provides. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
No, you go ahead. You're good.
Oh my God! Don't knock my mic over, Kitty.
No.
Let's see. Drug asset, civil asset forfeiture. This is on the Attorney General's website in South Dakota. It provides that certain property is subject to forfeiture when it's being used for the possession or distribution of controlled substances or marijuana. A vehicle is subject to forfeiture if it is used to facilitate the transportation, possession, or concealment of any illegal controlled substance or 8 ounces or more of marijuana. Furthermore, any asset is subject to forfeiture if the proceeds of the distribution of controlled substances or marijuana. The vehicle and other assets are then used by law enforcement or are sold and deposited into the Drug Control Fund. The Drug Control Fund is used to fund drug enforcement programs throughout the state. So it appears that if you kill somebody, there's no civil asset forfeiture. But if you sell marijuana, there is.
Yeah, I almost wonder if there isn't some sort of a conflict there with our new marijuana. I mean, we passed rec and medical, but I would almost bet that doesn't make that just go away.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that they'll still use it. You know,
If they say illegal use, like in a crime, I guess marijuana is legal, but
if you still had X amount, they
you could maybe still illegally possess it, and maybe that it's a good question, but I don't know for sure. And
Yeah, that's probably what they'll probably try to do.
Yeah,
They'll probably keep that, even though it's legal. Be like, oh, you had 8 ounces or more. We got to take your semi. Sorry.
there was a guy. I'll tell you one more story on it because it was compelling. But there was a guy that I think none of this is factual because it's factual, but I can't remember all the details. Whereas the other one, I had that transcribed out, and that was at testimony, so I know that one was true.
Mm-hmm.
So I could get some of this wrong, but this guy that he was that he knew was talking to was from, I think, Philadelphia area. He was a doctor. He took a sabbatical. He bought a van so he could do a little tour of the U.S. And he did this tour in his new van that he bought.
Mm-hmm.
And came through Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And then as he was coming up from Colorado, South Dakota, so that he could look at Mount Rushmore, he still had gummies, and it was like a couple. He said one, it was like one or two. He had a couple gummies, and he ended up, getting.
They took his vehicle over a couple gummies.
And so I'm like, I don't know the facts of how many he had, but it wasn't like distributing amounts. And and it was, we have a state that people want to come see. But there are people that, we're not necessarily, we talk a lot about being open for business.
Yeah, it's definitely hurting tourism that they're just seizing people's cars over gummies.
Yeah. The stuff, if people aren't being treated with due process in South Dakota, like that's something they'll remember in terms of tourism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the old state motto was always "Come on vacation, leave on probation."
Yeah. Sturgis, right? Like that would be a huge part of Sturgis.
Yeah, Sturgis. I mean, the whole time the rally's going, that's all they do is every night they brag about how many people they arrested for drugs.
Yeah, and they publish the numbers. I don't know, somewhere in the paper out there, they will publish how much they got in forfeitures. So those are two of the areas. I'll tell you some cool partners. Is Lee McGrath with Institute for Justice. He's in Minnesota, but he's kind of renowned, and he actually came over. I can't remember if he was physically there for the civil asset forfeiture one. I wasn't in here that day, but he testified. He talks with people, he helps us out, and he's a great partner to have. But defense attorneys as well, they've heard a lot of the stories. And then obviously libertarians, that's a huge thing. Probably the only one of the biggest or only groups of people that really know about it in terms of why it exists and what's going on with it, and being knowledgeable on it.
Yeah, libertarians don't like civil asset forfeiture. That's certain.
So
it says that I got $2 million on that Argus Leader article in 2018. So that's a pretty big chunk of change to be just completely handed over with no regulation or oversight or anything. It's who knows what they're spending the money on?
$2 million too. I mean, geez, that's a lot. That's a lot of victims of this.
That's a lot of people driving through with just gummies and stuff that they're just taking everybody's cars, setting a bad name for South Dakota, because then they go back home, they talk about how, oh, you lost my vehicle because I just had a couple of gummies. None of the people they know are going to come visit South Dakota ever. And the people that they talk to about how their friend lost their vehicle, it's just going to spread.
I think I remember maybe there was some testimony too about people that were having their assets seized that they didn't even own.
Yeah.
They still owed money to the banks on these vehicles, and the state still didn't care, and would take it. It's
wow.
Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
It sounds really familiar, but I think I was thinking.
Or a trucker still owed a lot for his truck.
Yeah, those big ass semi trucks are expensive as hell. I just can't believe that.
6 figures, I bet.
For some reason, I felt like you and I were talking about that, Greg.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
But there was a little bit of bright news here if you want to share my screen for a second.
Definitely.
I'll hit the button. Oops. Can you see that?
Yep.
Now we can.
So Justin Amash, the only Libertarian in the House of Representatives in Congress, unfortunately, he's due to leave office here pretty soon because he didn't run
Yeah.
for re-election. But he introduced a bill the other day to eliminate civil asset forfeiture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to read through the bill quick. Geez, there's just so much in here. But I did come across this, and I thought this was interesting. That I think the way I'm reading this is he's using the 14th Amendment to actually say that the states can't have civil asset forfeiture either. So the way I am interpreting this is if it were to pass Congress, the states couldn't even, the state would have to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But I admit I don't know everything about the bill.
Yeah, let's look up the 14th Amendment.
Oh, I have this sitting here next to me.
Okay, 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So, yeah, I could definitely see how on the 14th Amendment would apply to this.
Yeah, that was his argument about civil asset forfeiture depriving you of due process, which I think Lisa said.
You think the Senate's going to take it up, or do you think they're just going to ignore Moshla?
I don't have any hope that Congress will do the right thing.
Yeah, me either.
So that brings an interesting thing too. Like if something, well, I guess they'd have to. Never mind. I was thinking through the idea of them bringing this at the federal level,
Mm-hmm.
And does it allow states to kind of come up with those decisions? But if it's not constitutional, it doesn't matter. It's not a state's federal rights thing; it's a constitution thing. So
yeah, because you're violating our rights.
Yeah, because I don't know. I don't think the civil court would count as equal protection of the law. Because don't you have less protections under the civil court than you do as a criminal court? Like, isn't there like a lot lower threshold of evidence you need? And don't they like make you prove that the money wasn't used for criminal activity instead of them having to prove that it was?
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely violates the equal protection of law.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other big criticism is that they can have it, and at least in South Dakota, even without a conviction, you have to convince them why you want it, like why you should have it back.
Show receipts.
Mm-hmm. And there's a trust thing there. So there's a gal, Christian, she runs a Facebook page for inmates and families. She's just really does a really good job of connecting people together around raising awareness of what's going on in some of the prisons and jails. And she was kind of sharing a story and of not realizing she had been involved in civil asset forfeiture, that she was connected to that process, and just a phrase that she used. I don't mean to retell her story, but her phrasing was, I just didn't even consider that if the state is taking this, it would be wrong. So like she really felt like she didn't feel like she could fight it. A lot of times people don't feel like they can fight it because you would trust that the state is, if they're taking something from you, that's being done lawfully and within the Constitution. So that's a difficult thing too, when people they don't know necessarily to fight it because they don't even realize that it's wrong.
Well, I would say it's expensive too, because I know, a few, number of years back, I can remember being charged with something that I didn't necessarily think that I should have been charged with, but the options were to pay a couple $100 fine or pay $2,000 to an attorney. And so I opted to just pay the fine, because it just made financial sense to me to not waste $2,000. And in some of these, that's why I was saying about that $2 million number, because a lot of these people that they're stealing from or that they're confiscating stuff, let's just imagine that the average total is probably way less than $5,000. And so if let's say you had a car that maybe blue books for $2 or $3,000 and they stole it, are you honestly going to hire an attorney
Yeah.
and try to fight it and try to get your stuff?
Right. I think it was 80% of people that have their stuff taken, they're not even charged with the crime. Oh, we got some comments. Let's see. Tom says there should be no forfeiture without a criminal prosecution for sure. If they can't convict criminally, they should have to return assets with interest added.
Ooh,
That's a
I
good
like
point,
that.
Tom. I agree. Double
Yeah.
dose of time right here. Civil courts should not count, but they consider them due process or the IRS would be powerless.
Mhm.
Interesting point there.
Mhm.
Yeah, but civil courts, I mean, this is kind of a moot point because obviously this isn't how it works. But the way the system was designed was that civil court was for you and I.
Mhm.
If you and I had disputes, it's to moderate disputes between us, not the government to, be the victim. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's really, I mean, yeah, I guess, and I don't know a lot about the civil courts, so I couldn't weigh in on that. But it's an interesting thought having the government as involved in that civil court.
Yeah. So, do we want to keep? What's
yeah, that
up?
was kind of. I was just gonna say, yeah, I think I've said it before on the show, but that was kind of the whole court system. It's like, well, so in this state or in this case, the state is suing you, and then you are fighting them, and the moderator is the government, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the impartiality? That's why I was
Mhm.
kind of alluding to in a civil trial, are you even allowed a jury? Because that, can maybe be argued that that's more impartial, but that judge, I mean, we're just supposed to believe and take for granted that justice is blind but they work for the state,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something that just came up the other day. I heard somebody talking about civil asset forfeiture, and I was thinking, because I like the communication points you're making there in civil, because I didn't even think that far, like past to that. One of the other things I heard somebody say that was more compelling to another person that was nearest was that it was pretty much because of a lot of the drug laws and things that Biden put into place, and a lot of just directly that Biden put into place with civil asset forfeiture that is as strong as it is today. And that, when you're talking in South Dakota with conservatives, is effective because maybe they feel like you're being tough on crime, soft on crime, that's competing. But
Mhm.
if you can explain, like, this was put in place because of Biden, then that's almost like an automatic, like, oh, Biden, like that. Then it's
Yeah.
because it was Biden, and then you have to lean on due process. This is interesting because whoever you speak to, like, when you're talking about being able to defend yourself in the civil court, like,
Yeah.
the person that's going to reach them, or the fact that, like, you're taking away somebody's livelihood or the poverty aspect of all that, that's going to reach that person. And then for another person, it's going to be something like due process. So that in South Dakota, in terms of gaining support and explaining that to legislators who may have not even heard of it before, you have to explain the story and that emotion of, like, how that's not fair. And you feel that when you hear somebody else's story, but then also you have to combine it with facts on why it's, like you were saying, it can be expensive, like it's not,
Mhm.
but it's also a windfall for the state. So they kind of balance out, but also that it's just not constitutional. So you have to hit on that the hardest of anything, depending if you're talking to, a person that's their number one thing. So it reaches a broad audience, but people don't realize it. That a
Yeah.
lot of people would care about it, and it's not a conservative or a liberal issue. It is a libertarian issue. It's we're the only ones that care about it, but it's not like, neither one of them are necessarily taking it up, but they
Mhm.
have their own reasons for why they should support it.
Yeah. Let's see. Tom says, "Laugh out loud, Greg. Where's your moral values? Just don't pay the tickets."
How does that work? What happens when you don't pay tickets?
Yeah, you can't fight the law. You can, but it's expensive.
Well, and that's why I love you. I can't remember your phrasing if it was this year or last year. But when you said in one of your speeches about, every law being backed by violence, every law being backed by a gun. And that's true. I mean, to a degree, you don't pay those fines, you can go to jail.
Yeah.
If you're arrested, you will die.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, one of the arguments for taxation isn't theft. It's like, okay, well, you just don't pay those taxes sometime, and then when you're sitting in a prison cell, tell me it's not theft, and you're not being forced to, yeah. I just think that so many laws just shouldn't exist in
Yeah.
general, and we've really, they call it micromanaging if it was a company, but what it is the government's micromanaged our lives. And they've got a law for everything. One of the stupidest things a year ago or something like that, it was like back when Mike Huther was still the mayor in Sioux Falls, and he had signed up, or the city council, or he had promoted whatever. It was a bill to make it illegal to smoke on city property. And it's whatever. Maybe you could think it's a good bill. You could think it's a terrible bill. Whatever. But the point is, it's like, well, who's going to enforce that law? Like, you expect law enforcement to go out and arrest people and do this and that to people that are smoking a cigarette? Come on, like.
Yeah, that basically takes them away from focusing on serious issues.
Yeah, that's why, like, they're not always supportive of it. Like, law enforcement's not always supportive of, some of the stuff they have to do. It's like they have to do it.
Yeah.
Especially if you take the incentive away with civil asset forfeiture and don't keep it in the same county, at least they're not like taking for their own. But yeah, it's called perverse incentives, and like most of them just don't necessarily even want to be doing that. Or like Greg, the mask mandates. Obviously, that seems so obvious to us, but
yeah.
No, we're not like, you don't have to be anti-mask to be anti-mandate. And in Minneapolis, where they just did the defund police and they're like rallying against police, now you're asking them, I know I'm speaking the obvious, but like you're asking them to go out and interact with people more than they are now. So every interaction increases the risk of something happening. And now you're asking them to go out more. They just had this, I'm on two tangents, but they just had reported some of the numbers on one of the checkpoints they had here in Minnehaha County, or maybe it was a saturation patrol.
Yeah.
It's either a saturation patrol or it was the sobriety checkpoint. But all the people that went through, and they had a number on the people that went through, one person got arrested.
Yeah, I read that.
But 4 people got arrested for other stuff.
Yeah.
Not even the drunk driving. So all it was like, not all it was, but I mean, it's that.
And they stopped over 200 people. So it's like, man, you're bothering 200 people to get one person actually that was drunk driving. I just think that's a little draconian. And I don't even think it's constitutional. I know the Supreme Court said that it was like in the early 90s, but like, how is it constitutional to do that when you need probable cause that somebody's been committing a crime? Their argument is, well, they're letting you know where the sobriety checkpoint's going to be beforehand. I was like, I don't see how that has anything to do with it.
There was a couple months ago, there was an article on like Argus Leader or something like that, where some county in South Dakota had actually done what they were calling safety checks during the middle of the day. Like, it wasn't even a saturation patrol. It wasn't even a sobriety checkpoint. It was literally, they just decided apparently in this county that they could just start pulling people over and checking their, whatever, their ID.
Yeah. Check your windshield wipers, see if your blinkers are working.
Kick your tires. Hey, top off your oil, sir. No, but then so I was telling somebody about that, and he's like, "Oh, well, you should send me the article." And I looked, and I even went back like a couple months. And I was like, I can't find the article, but I know I saw it.
I think it was just on the Highway Patrol's Facebook page. I remember commenting on it. I get a lot of crap for commenting on their stuff when I see something unconstitutional happening.
Yeah. Jack, one time, I think, walked up. Chad had gotten pulled over for something, and they always joke about like, getting pulled over and you walk up and you're like, knock the back thing and you say broken tail light, like, I pulled you over, broken tail light. So Jack does that because we were joking about it so much. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't give people like perverse incentives like that either.
Mhm.
So I was gonna say too, in South Dakota, so there's gonna be a bill coming this next year. So I'm gonna put on my AFP hat for a second, the Americans for Prosperity hat, and talk about that. I was joking how I was gonna take it on.
Ooh, kitty
Put it
photo
on.
bomb.
Huh?
Kitty photo bomb.
Yeah.
We got a special guest in studio.
Coming in right now. So we're gonna be. Oh, hi. Hello. Okay, sorry. We are gonna be bringing a bill this year, or there's going to be a bill brought that will support and that will bring a couple of things we talked about. So call it like the Overton window. So we have the possibility we want to get to here, but we have to like move like this. But we also need, like Greg needs you to say things on podcasts like this that and the war on drugs, because I think you need both kind of hand in hand. Like you have to make some movement, but you also need to say like, this is where we need to go to. This is principally what's correct. It's not right to say these things are all okay, but this isn't. So I love your approach. Like it's so necessary. But in terms of getting stuff through like this year, the things we're going to focus on are bringing the criminal and the civil process together.
Mhm.
So if you
And
talk to anybody and they are going to bring it forward again this year,
well, yeah, there'll
Yeah.
be one coming through. And so it will come through judiciary first. And so what was neat is that it went through more of like a tougher on crime Senate judiciary last year. And there are some people who would normally vote no pretty consistently on things.
Mhm.
If it was just like a soft on crime thing, there's no way they vote no every time. But when it came to due process and the Constitution, that's where it made the huge difference. So there's a good chance. There's a better chance this year than last year, and last year died on the Senate floor. So there's a better chance. But as it goes through judiciary, then we'll put the opportunity out there for people to engage. And so I know like libertarians can kind of take and run with that. And so if there's like an ask of people that they would just let people know when that bill goes through that they would oppose it. And sometimes it's enough for citizens to oppose it. Just like, you're my legislator, I want you to vote no, this is unconstitutional, and we want
Mhm.
it to effects. Sometimes it means really having a relationship with that legislator or knowing somebody who does.
Mhm.
So that's another thing that can be really helpful when it comes to getting a bill passed is, maybe we just spread the word organically, but also maybe we know people who are influential to different, to the legislator, and that we can work through that way as well. So those are a couple of things. We'll put those out there when they come up, but it'll probably go through.
Mhm.
I mean, it will go through judiciary first, and so we'll put a call out for people to call their legislators just on that committee first.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to point out too that people that are supporting civil asset forfeiture because they want to be tough on crime, they're not really being tough on crime. What they're being is tough on suspicion of crime, because nobody's being convicted of any crime when they're getting their property taken, which is theft, and that's a crime in and of itself. So they're really promoting crime, in some kind of crazy loophole that the government set up and allowing them to do that. Tom says, is Lisa saying we need to put pressure on the Judiciary Committee first?
Yep. So you'll want to put that pressure there. And for some people, we just say, it's accountability, and you're trying to kind of pressure or convince somebody that you are hearing from people in your district, so you need to vote this way. But I'll tell you one other thing that's really neat is when you call your legislator, it's also a way to show them support. There's a lot of times when a legislator, this is what I found out way more than I ever expected, that they want to say yes or no to something. They want to, maybe they feel like that's right. And it kind of gives them a cover to say, well, the people in my district, I'm representing them, and this is what they want me to do. And so it can be cover for a legislator too.
Mhm.
It can be pressure for them to change their mind, but a lot of times it's like cover for them to be able to say, I mean, yes, they should vote on principle, and And that's the idea, is that they can vote if that's their principle, and they also feel like they've got a backing. So I saw it more in a positive way in the last year than I ever used to see it. It can be both. But yeah, short answer, yeah. It'll go through either House or Senate Judiciary first.
All right. Well, let's see who is this the accurate Judiciary Committee right here? This, or they got to update this again?
Look on the SDLRC. Let me look.
SDLRC.
It's I said that wrong too. It's sdlegislature.gov.
Okay.
Samsonite. I was way off.
Let me get rid of this then.
And then,
Okay, then which section I click on? 221 legislators. Oh, wait, here. Let's get my screen up so you can help me navigate.
okay.
1 second here. Okay.
The committee list here.
Is it this one? 2021 legislators. And then does it show?
Why is my screen different? I don't feel like that. Okay, so go to session at the top and go to 2021 chambers committees.
Okay, here we go.
And then it's Senate and House Judiciary.
All right, we'll start with the House. Oh, here we go. House Judiciary. Okay, Tom, here's who we need to contact. We got Aaron Aylward. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
My District 6 House is on this committee. I'll be giving him a call.
Mm-hmm.
We got Doug Barthel. Oh, Ryan. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I hope not, but Quatch. John Hanson, Scott Odenbach, Sue Peterson, Tom Pisch, Perry Poirier. I shouldn't even be reading this. I can't pronounce names for the crap. Taylor Redfield, Rebecca Reimer, Bethany Soy, Tamara St. John, and Mike Stevens. I'm sorry I pronounced those names wrong, but
it's like Pishki and Raphael. Everything else is perfect.
And then let's see, Senate. Here we go. It's a lot shorter list. We got Michael Diedrich, Helen Duomo, Timothy Johns, Michael Roll, Arthur Roosh, Lee Schonenbeck, and David Wheeler.
Yeah, and I won't there's one I have not talked yet with Michael Roll. He's up in Sisseton area, I believe. He just beat out Susan Wismer, and he's interesting. He is a Republican. He doesn't when he did his interview, he was talking about being supportive of marijuana measures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I'm pretty sure he was also, he didn't push back against Medicaid expansion, which is another thing when we go into whatever topic we step in next, we'll be pushing back on Medicaid expansion this year. I would encourage everybody to, just because it doesn't help those even with Medicaid. But he talked about supporting Medicaid expansion, but he also talked about supporting marijuana legalization. And he is a Republican. I think he comes mostly from a libertarian perspective.
We had a guy message South Dakotans against prohibition during the election. I don't know where he's from, but that might have been him. Because he said he supported the issue. It was before the primary, I think. So he was trying to win the primary. I don't remember who that was, but it could have been him.
Yeah. So I haven't talked to him yet, but I remember seeing his interview and thinking oh, I need to talk with him. So I would imagine he's probably a good one to have there. We know Aaron is, because he's going to follow along the libertarian principles. So that would be, that's good on House Judiciary. But otherwise, those are tough ones. I think House is probably tougher than Senate.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
And then it's got to go through both Judiciary committees before it goes to either floor.
It goes to House, I'm guessing House Judiciary, but it'll go through House or a Judiciary, say House, and then it'll go to the House floor. And if it passes, it'll cross houses and go to Senate Judiciary.
Okay.
I think the Senate will be Okay, so I think that it'll go House first. So yeah, if you are, I mean, they could start hearing on principle and things even now without a bill number. We did also do a petition last year. I would imagine we'll have something that we'll put out there too.
All right. Do you guys want to go move on to a different subject here,
Homeschool.
or?
Schooling.
Yeah, let's do education real quick, and then we'll go to occupational licensing. Let's see. Well, let's go to the. No, that's my mic. My other kitty is making an appearance here now.
Views are way up. Statistics show that whenever the kitties are on camera, the charts are, insane.
Oh yeah, we should have brought all the kitties. I was saying earlier before we started, my kitty was up here. I thought she'd be back to hang out, but not so much.
So yeah, this is from Americans for Prosperity. I'll just read through this. We want all our children to succeed, and we know the key to that success is a quality education. But for many of America's children, that success is too often based on their family's income level and zip code. They find themselves stuck in schools that underperform or simply fail to address their individual needs. What's more, our education system makes it very difficult for families and educators to work together to develop solutions that work for individual children. Students require educational solutions as diverse and unique as they are. The one-size-fits-all approach allows too many to fall through the cracks. The answer? Educational freedom. Families should have a wide array of options to select the best education for their kids, whether it be through public school down the street, private or charter schools, homeschooling, virtual school, or a host of other options. Every family should have the freedom to choose the right type of education for their children. Educational opportunity is the right solution for students, for educators, and for families. Yeah. So is there anything else to break down in that little bit there? Or?
I mean, I would say one of the biggest areas when we talk about the education that we've noticed lately is that with the pandemic, like one of the biggest things that happened, we found was the most helpful was rolling back regulation, like less government, if you can imagine, ended up with better outcomes in healthcare and all these other types of regulations. And it was the same way for school. There was a bunch, we can talk about like the executive orders. I was going to pull that up too, but the executive orders through the governor this last year, one of them was ending seat time requirements. So it's even saying like the government can say based on how much time you're sitting in your seat, how much time is in school, you can use that to determine, if you pass or fail, if you move on. And that they're saying like seating requirements that's not what you should use to determine. You shouldn't have to meet this seating time requirement. We could see that with the pandemic that some kids were just fine. So, I mean, that was just one example people found is that when they didn't have a public schooling going on and they could actually choose what they wanted to do, they had better outcomes.
Yeah, so we got this graph from the Cato Institute. It basically shows that the cost of public education is increasing while test scores are remaining the same. So yeah, what kind of solutions do you think there are for making the education system we currently have better? Would it be to encourage more privatization and homeschooling, or like what's the end game here?
So
what
that's a good question.
Yeah, what's America's Prosperity's vision on how to make the school system better?
So, and that'll be different than like libertarian vision, like to a degree, because this is another area where, from a libertarian perspective, we're going, why is the government involved in education? Why is there public schooling at all? Like, why is there government schooling? Why especially, somebody else's sticking point might be, I'm okay with education, but why is the federal government the one deciding how I teach my kids and how they test out of things? So for some people, they kind of like move along the scale and they say, I'm okay with it, but I'm not okay with Washington making the decisions.
Yeah.
Like a local control issue. And then, of course, there are some that are going, yeah, there's an in between. Also, even from that to say, homeschooling and charter schools and, homes and private schooling like that should be non-regulated. And there are some that think
Yeah.
it should be regulated. So that whole like Overton window there means that some people really think also on the far end of that every dollar, they're okay with it being taxpayer dollars, and they're saying every dollar of that has to go to public school, no matter what. Like, we're going to collect all this money in taxes from you, and you can decide where you want to go to school. But even if you go to a private school, your money is still going to public schools.
Yeah.
Right before that, between that and like non-regulation of homeschooling, I mean, that's what AFP, Americans for Prosperity, would fall
Yeah.
under. There should be no regulations over homes, or there shouldn't be, I would say, any or as much
Hmm.
schooling or private schooling. All the way kind of from there to the scope of we should be able to use public dollars for private schooling and homeschooling because it's your money and you can figure out what you want to do with it. The thing in South Dakota is we changed our formula years back, and instead of the money following the kid, our formula is more determined by how teacher pay goes. There was an issue with teacher pay here.
Hmm.
Not that people wouldn't think that there is now, but it was really, really bad. And so they thought they needed to change the formula in order to have more funds coming in for teachers. And so they did that. Now it doesn't follow the student. And now you have where you can't just like pull a kid from public school to private school and change the funds, which a lot of people
Yeah.
would argue libertarian, we shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars for that
Mhm.
anyway.
Well, I think Kent Wisely had a plan for his education plan. He was a West River Senate candidate. His plan was that instead of your taxes automatically just going to the public school system, that you would get a voucher of some sort, and you would pick which school you wanted to send your kids to and which school you wanted to pay. What do you think about that, Greg, when you first heard? I think I first heard it at his fundraising.
Well, I like the I like the idea of vouchers and charter schools and more options for education. I think that's great. Well, I think one of the challenges, obviously, is South Dakota's still a pretty rural state. I mean,
Mm.
if well, I guess I was almost going to ask a question like to Lisa. When I hear a lot of options for these alternative educations, for me, I don't like. Okay, so say charter schools or something like that. There's probably only about 10 cities in the whole state that
Hmm.
have a population that is even big enough
Yeah.
that they could support, public school, Catholic school, a charter school, uh, and so a lot of times, I live in a small town, and then you get West River, it's even smaller. Uh, so I like the voucher idea, but if you live in the middle of nowhere and the closest school is already 15 miles from where you live or whatever, and there isn't another one for 60 miles or whatever the case may be, some of those options maybe aren't so realistic. What do you think South Dakota is the biggest challenge specifically in South Dakota with education?
Oh
Is it the
man.
money not going with the student, like you said, or
Yeah, actually, and I like your question. So we should have people weigh in on that because that's a really good question. Even just in general, like what does everybody see as the biggest issue in South Dakota education?
Yeah,
yeah?
everybody wants to call in and give us your
Yeah.
2 cents. Phone number 605-857-3387. It's on the bottom of the screen.
That would be awesome. I think that's such a good question because I think everybody will have something that they see as the issue different. I I think our biggest thing here is we worry so much about there's a lot of regulation. We worry about teacher pay, like that becomes a big part of the conversation. there is not a whole lot of conversation about results and outcomes. Like, I think that's probably one of the biggest just underlying issues is that we're talking about the inputs. Like, we're talking about the teacher pay, we're talking about curriculum. We have all of these things we want to talk about, but those are the inputs, and we're not like comparing outcomes. So one thing that happened, there's a lot of control from the state down. It's just like with the free market. I can't believe I'm saying public schools are like the free market, but
Exactly. They're
I
exactly
can put
like
my
the free
libertarian
market.
card in now.
All these comments are coming in now. Oh God, just kidding.
I'm wearing the yellow. But if you let teachers innovate and you let schools innovate, public, private, all of that, like, it's a really good discussion to have for sure. But if you're letting the people who are closest, make the determinations, and they're, teachers are the ones that are innovative and schools can be innovative, you have different outcomes. You hear things about Harrisburg School District and Brandon School District. And my daughter goes to a public school, and also have to turn my card in again. But she goes to public school, and she goes to like an arts-based school. And like, there's just a lot of really neat options out there, but your zip code shouldn't determine your level of education. And in South Dakota, that's what happens all the time. So you could have a good teacher like that. You could luck out, and your zip code could be somewhere where you've got really good, innovative schools and teachers. But maybe not. And then all of a sudden you're going to a school where, the pandemic happened and they didn't know how to pivot, and now you're not being treated well. You can't just up and go to another school.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an open enrollment issue, but if people don't have the ability to, not all people have the ability to just pick up, whatever you got, like, go to wherever you need to for this private school and financially be able to put your kid through the school, because you're also paying tax dollars for them to be in this public school. So I think the biggest thing is just making those options available for all people. There's an organization we work with. It's called Yes Every Kid. But if anybody wants this at all, I can send it out. It's like a legislative toolkit. Have different ideas, but they're all centered around, like, on the micro scale of that the Overton window to move in smaller directions. It's things like changing regulation to make it more local within a school district versus the state. So you take off the things like some of the testing requirements, some of the, like, you have to do evaluations of these teachers. You have to have seat time requirements. And you roll back those and say that the state should have that much determination of these local schools. That just like we do, like, states versus federal rights, it's to some degree you give them more choice, more innovation. And what happens then is, if you have a school and they've got the freedom to do something neat and have a different outcome, if you start to see good outcomes in a school district, you could use that as an example to the rest, just like we do with the United States. So we have different laws. One state can do something really well. They're like this incubation of a good idea. Everybody else can see the outcomes, and then they can follow suit. They can see the good ideas and principles that work. In the education system, we just control so much from Washington, and we control so much from here that there's not a lot of local control. So that's on the one scale. On the other side of it, or the other scale, it's the fact that public school that's like your one option that you have to go to. So and then I feel like I'm rambling on this piece, but there's one good part to know is there was something in South Dakota called the Blaine Amendment, and that said that you couldn't take public school, like, taxpayer dollars, you couldn't put them towards a school that had any religious affiliation. So if you had charter schools and the Catholic schools, and you wanted to do the thing where the money followed the kid, you couldn't use that money on a private school that had any kind of religiousness to it. That was done because it was the Irish Catholics that came over. They put this amendment in place because they didn't want, they discriminated against the Irish Catholics, and they didn't want kids in that school, going to that school with taxpayer dollars. So that just this last year, it was the Espinoza decision. They determined that that is not constitutional, that we can't prohibit that from happening based on religious grounds. So now in South Dakota, you have a chance to use money for charter schools and vouchers. But again, like Greg was saying, that's still not the biggest issue, is that you should allow for just as much choice as possible for kids that learn differently than others. which is
Yeah.
every-
So in
Yeah.
South Dakota, there's no teachers union or nothing like that, is there?
Yeah, they have a pretty strong teachers union here. And then there's SCEA. I'm trying to think. They did a good idea for a community-based school in the Chetty Sequowan, if I'm saying it correctly, school that they wanted to put together last year. And actually, a Democratic Senator Heinert brought that bill. So it was really interesting because all of these kind of teacher associations that he was normally on the same side of on educational issues, he was now on the opposite side from them in trying to push for this community-based school because there was a lot of just protectionism over the public school system. They didn't want to use the tax dollars for the school. That was a long answer also, but it's there's a lot of different school associations that really push back against that type of stuff.
I just wasn't sure since South Dakota's a right to work state and there's not a whole lot of unions in the state.
Yeah, I don't. You guys are faster at looking stuff up than me, but I'm curious on that. That's a good question.
Well, because one of the downsides of the union for teachers, especially, and for police officers and for any government employee, essentially, is that it's harder to maintain accountability. If somebody has poor performance on the job,
Yeah.
it's really hard to fire that person or get rid of that person.
Yeah.
So I'm not against public or private unions. I guess private sector unions. Like I'm not against that, but when it comes to unions in government, I don't think they should exist at all. We should be able, we can hold politicians accountable by voting them out of office, but yet if you take away the ability to hold government employees accountable, that's
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff on labor issues and things like that too. That would be awesome to engage in.
All right.
the third topic. What was
Third
the
topic.
I'll tell you
Occupational
real quick-
license. Oh yeah.
Real quick, I was going to tell you. That was rude. Sorry, guys. That an education.
Band. Goodbye, Lisa.
Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
We're not actually broadcasting this one. That's okay. I just got to hang out with my friends for the last hour and 15 minutes then. This is what we'd be doing if we're sitting together anyways.
Yeah. That's the inspiration behind this podcast is Greg and I just sitting in my couch talking about
People need to
in
hear
South
this.
Dakota. Yeah. And we're like, we need to record ourselves, Greg, and get this out there.
Yeah, definitely. Have me more. But that's with education. I was going to say one quick story is that a friend of mine, I think this was so cool. When the pandemic came out, she was trying to do the virtual schooling with her kids. And she's in Wisconsin, so they just shut everything down like right away. So she couldn't send her kids to school and she did virtual and she was terrified of it at first. Her older son is very, very hyper, would be the easiest, but he's got really strong ADHD. And she found out when they were sitting at the desk trying to listen to a teacher on the video camera, like that was ineffective. It was driving, it wasn't helping him. So she took him outside one day and they were doing math on the front sidewalk with chalk, and he picked up everything and loved it. But that's never something you're going to have in a school where it's a one size fits all. So the concept of that, just the idea of allowing for more options would be huge for so many people when you think of better outcomes for their kids. So I would love to hear stories on that. Would be the one ask I'd have around education. If people have stories about how the education system has either impacted them negatively or positively, that would be awesome. That was compelling. And there's an education committee for that too.
Tom says, in a rural setting like South Dakota, I think sports programs actually hurt the ability of higher quality, smaller rural schools.
Tom, Talk about
Taking
that
away
more.
money.
You'll have to like give us some more details on your point there, Tom.
You have to call in, Tom. Put the
But
dog.
one thing I always bring up about how we need more options is how I don't think it's safe to have all like thousands of students in one building. I feel like that's basically asking for something bad to happen. Like we have school shootings happening all the time, and like if we had more schools with less students, you know, I think it'd be a safer situation, and then we wouldn't have to hear all these gun control comments. But speaking of, since we're on this topic of schools, I had one thing that's slightly off topic, but slightly on topic.
Uh-oh.
But there's a fourth grader was at they can't go to school in person anymore, so they're going on Zoom meeting schools, and he had a BB gun back behind him on his Zoom camera, and he got suspended because he had a BB gun behind him, and they're treating it like he brought his BB gun to school just because it was in a Zoom meeting. And they suspended him, and he appealed, but then the school board upheld the suspension. I just think this is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Let's see. In September, Louisiana's Jefferson Parish Public Schools suspended a fourth grader for 6 days because he allowed a BB gun to briefly appear on his screen during a virtual Zoom school. This is from Reason, by the way. On Friday, the school board declined to remove the suspension from his permanent record, according to local news. They did change the 6-day suspension to a 3-day suspension. Oh, thank you. Even though, man,
That's 3 unexcused.
Yeah. So, like, for instance, if this was like my kid, I would definitely not want him to go to the school anymore. I would want another option. I'd be like, okay, I want my kid to go to a school that's not a gun grabbing school because this is insane.
I would just like to point out that by giving him 3 unexcused absences, I don't live down there, so I don't know the rules exactly, but there's a lot of truancy laws that you're talking about. So you could literally be opening this kid up to some sort of, or his parents up to some sort of criminal prosecution because you just, gave him these unexcused absences.
School board member Simon Dickerson, a former teacher, asked Nyron Harrison, the father, to think of how his teacher felt seeing a gun on her computer screen. I know what a BB gun looks like, and you know what it resembles? A real gun, okay? It resembles a real gun.
Even if it was a real gun, it shouldn't have mattered because it's at his house,
I wouldn't have wanted to have read that without hearing it in your voice, Devin, with that great laugh at the end.
Yeah, I just think this stuff's like this is comical, like how this is happening, and it's like, how is this America? What is this? Is this Canada? I expect this to happen in Canada, not America.
Well, everyone in South Dakota always tells the stories about when I was growing up. You could pull up to the high school with your gun rack in the back of your truck, and nobody said anything about it, and so to have them suspended because there was.
And to uphold the suspension, I was for sure the appeal would go through, and that it was being like, oh, we overreacted, sorry. Yeah. But no, they're like, no, double down. I'm shaming your father too.
Yep. Well, and that's exactly right. Because you there's so many cases that go through with stuff like this where you're going, I still have faith that obviously this is so grotesquely wrong that they're going to fix this, and then they don't, and you're like, well, I guess I don't have faith. And then that's when you just start a podcast, because otherwise, what do you like? That's the trying to change things within government. It is so frustrating and slow sometimes that at some point I remember asking Chris Ann Hall when she came to South Dakota. She would go around and she would teach people about states' rights, and that we have let all this crazy stuff go to the federal government, and how nuts that we have to pull it back into states' rights. And she's talking to a room of, I think there was probably 10 to 15 of us, and it was really compelling. But you're going, is anybody else like, how come this room isn't full? Is anybody else even going to hear this? This is such good information. But I'm like, how do you keep going? How do you not get tired?
Yeah.
And how do you keep hope? Because it feels pretty hopeless. Like, it feels like everything you're talking about is no one's doing it. And she goes, well, at some point, she's like, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
So you gotta let that to look forward to.
It's pretty much going to fall apart at some point, and then we're going to realize, like, oh shoot. But she kind of pointed to her son, and she's like, that's why. She goes, I got to make it better for the next generation. And if we're like, especially when we're talking about schooling, if we're putting kids in the same schools and learning the same things, like, and they're learning to rely on more government.
Yeah.
Not because they're in public school, but it is. I mean, I don't rail against what they teach in public school, but I mean, it does make you wonder when it's their government schools, like.
Yeah. That's one of the memes that you always see. The public school is the punchline, and it's how, you got the government teaching kids about the government. So obviously they're going to learn the government's the good guys. The government didn't lie about the Gulf of Tonkin. Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. Like, it just goes on.
They definitely
Epstein killed himself. Definitely killed himself. It's like, no.
Pick and choose what they teach people, because we were watching this episode of this TV show. It was right before the election, and so it was a comedy TV show, but they did anyway, the whole episode. This guy's like, they were talking about how the elections are, and it's hard to explain it, but anyway, the whole complaint was that the guy was like, well, I went to school and they taught us in school that this is a democracy, and you're telling me that this isn't a democracy? Well, how can that be? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, who told you this is a democracy? Because nowhere in anything did it ever say a democracy. So who told you that?
Yeah.
So how have you exactly been educated to believe that this country is a democracy? Because it's not. It's a constitutional republic. It always has been. Because one of the things in the show, I was all upset because of the electoral college. Well, you're telling me that my vote actually isn't, and these people get to meet, and it's like, where did you go to school? Like, you're complaining about this stuff like it's new information, and if this is what you were taught, no offense, but like, it's way off, buddy. But it is, honestly, it's the narrative that's told.
I didn't know about. Oh, sorry.
I remember when I was in high school, government or like civics class, that was an optional elective class. That wasn't even like something that was required of anybody to learn. So I know people that graduated in 2007. We definitely didn't get. I always just educated myself on like how the government works and stuff, because the school didn't really even care to teach anybody. And I think it shows now that we're all grown up, and a lot of people, mistakenly call America a democracy when, we're a republic.
I didn't learn about Japanese internment camps until sophomore
year.
I'm like,
yeah,
they come up before now.
Yeah, I think I wish there was a bunch of Oliver Stone type teachers to be the government teacher, because he would tell everybody what happened in Vietnam for real, just some honest lectures.
American history.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, oh man, there's a lot of ways to go with that too, but I didn't necessarily realize that there was stuff I didn't know that was ugly about America, and then you start to see it, and then it's like, well, so if we could go in licensing, healthcare, or Section 230. We don't have to cover all of this, but that would be another area. Like, we're talking about internet freedoms and stuff, the things that people know now that they didn't, or that they can freely exchange ideas, opens up for the crazy conspiracy theories, and it opens it up for the truth. Like, so you get both, and you have to filter through. But it also, people are sharing information in ways they never have before. That's also true in education, because you have access to way more resources you had before.
We got one more comment over there.
Oh. Bobby Gregorchak. One could argue that while intended to be a republic, our country is more ran similar to an oligarchy. That's a good point, Bobby. I think since this would be a good segue to a video about that, since this person, Janet Yellen, was nominated to be the Treasury Secretary by Joe Biden, she has something to say about whether or not America is an oligarchy or a republic. And let's see, get my screen shared. Bobby's actually starting a podcast too in these trying times called Spinning the Podcast.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it should be good. Should be good stuff. Yeah, spinning the podcast, like spinning the pot, and then podcast.
Yes, I'll tune in.
Oh, did I? Here, wait. I've got to click that stupid allow audio button. I keep forgetting to do that. Share audio. Okay, let's see what Janet Yellen, the new Treasury Secretary under Joe Biden, has to say about what kind of government our country has.
Madam Chair, in the U.S. today, the top 1% own about 38% of the financial wealth of America. The bottom 60% own 2.3%. One family, the Walton family, is worth over $140 billion. That's more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. In recent years, we have seen a huge increase in the number of millionaires and billionaires, while we continue to have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. Despite this, as many of my Republican friends talk about the oppressive Obama economic policies, in the last year, Charles and David Koch struggled under these policies, and their wealth increased by $12 billion in 1 year, despite the oppressive Obama economic policies. In terms of income, 95% of new income generated in this country in the last year went to the top 1%. Now, a study which I've just introduced into the record by two professors from Princeton University, Professor Martin Gillens, and Northwestern University Professor Benjamin Page, basically suggests that while historically we have considered our society to be a capitalist democracy, we may now have entered into a phase where we are an oligarchic form of society. In your judgment, given the enormous power held by the billionaire class and their political representatives, are we still a capitalist democracy, or have we gone over into an oligarchic form of society in which incredible economic and political power now rests with the billionaire class?
So all of the statistics on inequality that you've cited are ones that greatly concern me. And I think for the same reason that you're concerned about them, they can determine the ability of different groups to participate equally in a democracy and have grave effects on social stability over time. And so I don't know what to call our system or how to, I prefer not to give labels, but there's no question that we've had a trend toward growing inequality. And I personally find it a very worrisome trend that deserves the attention of policymakers.
Thank you. I mean, I think the point that the professors are making and other.
Okay. So lots of good digest there.
That's a good segue.
I like how they're calling us a capital. I guess both Bernie Sanders and Janet Yellen can't really figure out what kind of government we have. He's calling us a democratic capitalist society, and she doesn't even know what to call us when asked if we're oligarchic or not.
No, Devin, she just doesn't prefer labels.
So yeah. Oh, I think I got the.
So if you ask Janet Yellen if she believed that this was a free country, she's like, "Well, I don't believe in labels."
Bobby says it's stirring the podcast.
Bobby, how do you say your last name?
It's Gregorchak.
Okay. I guess, yeah. I mean, we were just looking at his comment, like he was on the podcast. But that's
Yeah, I
a
was like,
good.
Devin must know him.
Yeah, Bobby's been to our meet and greets.
Mhm.
Yep.
I guess I didn't know
Uh,
his last name.
yeah. Well, not me neither. At least how to say it. Um, but that is a good segue if you guys wanted to go licensing because of the whole poverty, like
Yeah,
when you're
let's
talking
do
about
that.
poverty, like inequality, we know that government usually is one of the pushers of that system. So it's funny that he said Koch brothers because obviously, like with Americans for Prosperity, I'm gonna throw that hat back on. That is, one of the start. Well, Charles Koch now, works in that, but they also work with another organization. I didn't really intro myself or EFP very well, but earlier. But one of the things they talk about is as they really move into this libertarian ideals and push for these things that they will say like they have gone through party and now they kind of look at issues, but there's this move of everything. The mission statement of the organization is that everybody has a potential, that they want to live up to their fullest potential, and we need to remove barriers to that potential. But licensing and regulation is a whole huge part of that. And AFP is part of this larger organization called Stand Together. And so, as they believe that government and regulation come down, they also have these different arms that operate within business, within education and schooling, like usually secondary education, and then also within the, I just blanked on the last one, I'll get to it, that we should, society, that all of these institutions, along with government, as government rises, these other things need to fall. Or I'm sorry, as government falls, these other things need to rise. So they do lift up like businesses and entrepreneurs and individuals that want to do something, and they try and remove these barriers. So Coke was a big part of starting that, and now it's funded by a lot of just people across the country. He still has a big chunk, of course, but they will fight against the very corporate welfare that they benefit from. So I don't mean that to just uplift the Cokes, but to say that the reason a lot of corporations are allowed to become big corporations is because they usually have the protection of government. It's usually not
Yeah.
because what we want is like government to regulate them and keep them from being big. It's usually like you have pharmaceutical companies. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but you have pharmaceutical companies who are as big as they are because they have the protection of the government. When people talk about, marijuana and things like that, there's a lot of times when that MORE Act was, could have gone through.
Well, I just want to interject real quick because we're going through this whole COVID thing, and not South Dakota might not have it as bad as other states, but like how you just said, government protects business. One thing I've heard is they're complaining about how Amazon and Walmart have like just grown massively, record profits during this whole ordeal, and it's like, well, you've shut down small business.
Yep.
Yeah.
You, the government, and maybe
Yeah.
not necessarily the federal government,
Mm-hmm.
possibly doesn't have a whole lot of blame, I would say, in some of this. It's mostly state governments, but yeah, if you don't like the fact that Walmart and Amazon are getting all of our money, then you need to lay off these restrictions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right, Greg. You're smart.
And like the small businesses, once they're shut down, they're not going to come back. It's just too much of a financial burden to even start up a small business. So, this might be like a permanent long-term deal that we're going to have to overcome now over the next couple of years to get back into supporting small businesses.
And the government's response is to just print more money and apply for this loan and we'll get you a loan. We'll get you. It's like, well, you shouldn't have put us out of business to begin with.
Yeah, 30% of all the U.S. dollar bills were printed this year alone, which is just absolutely insane. We're basically going to be like the Weimar Republic soon, where we've got we're hauling like huge suitcases full of money to go buy a loaf of bread, and it's just not going to be good.
No.
Yeah, I imagine it's got to come crashing down at some point. The check's got to come due at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole. Well, I thought that was a really good point when you were talking about just how that regulation was an issue, but around COVID too. Was I telling you guys before the podcast started or after about just regulation in general, with COVID, how just relaxing that made things better. But when you put more restrictions on people within the state, yeah, you have worse outcomes for small business.
Hmm.
So I originally was going to start, and I just didn't have the bandwidth, like I couldn't get it going. But I was going to start a forum type of thing, and it was called Pivot, and it was like
Hmm.
business innovation or how businesses are innovating. Because in South Dakota, we actually got a chance to do that more than other places. But yeah, for people to rail against these giant corporations and how horrible they are, but
Hmm.
the policies that you're creating are the
Yeah.
things that are causing them to be as big as they are.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that people don't really seem to grasp is that, the regulations, the corporations pretend they don't want the regulations, but in reality, they're lobbying for the regulations because they're the only ones that can afford them.
Yeah.
So they want the regulations to keep their competition from getting a leg up and taking some of their market share.
Well, yeah, we were talking about it last week when we were talking about, or I think it was last week when we were talking about the cost to get like a liquor license.
Mm-hmm.
That's like $300,000 and stuff. Well, okay, and like you just said, okay, well, if I want to be a small business owner and I want to open a bar, well, it's going to cost me $300,000 just to get that liquor license. But do you
Mhm.
think Buffalo Wild Wings cares about $300,000 to get that liquor license?
Mm-hmm.
Nah,
Mhm.
probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So just to your point that these corporations don't care about those costs, those
Mm-hmm.
regulation costs.
Yeah.
But for you and I, they're barriers.
Mm-hmm. And it's people try, like I was thinking through this, is it like it's one of the things I haven't quite figured out, but it's almost like some people put their trust in these organizations and corporations and things. Like if we didn't have government to the degree that we do, we would think, take those regulations back. We trust these corporations and people more than we trust government and politicians. And for some people, it's the opposite. Like they don't trust corporations, but they'll trust government. And I think that's probably like the biggest thing because you're trusting somebody no matter what. Like you are putting your faith in one or the other,
Mhm.
if you want more or less regulation. But if you don't trust the corporations, but then you give them a tool of government and you say, here, now you can use this to your advantage. Now you're using the government in the hands of the corporations that you don't trust is usually what happens.
Yeah.
It's more so that they're a tool. Government is a tool for really, really big corporations. That was so cynical, but that's that's what it's like because of how much they can look at full industries. You put government regulations in place and you can completely control energy, the different energy industries, coal industry and nuclear and everything else. Totally different because of government intervention.
Tom says, great point on regulation.
Yeah. So speaking of regulation and occupational licensing,
Yeah.
that would be, all of that same idea. So it kind of transition, all of that same idea is you've got a small amount of people that are protective of these organizations. That happens within occupational licensing.
Yeah.
It's the government permission slip.
So let's look at this graph here from the Federal Trade Commission. It says the average training in states to require a license, and they've got EMTs 33 days, but cosmetologists 372 days to get the license to cut hair, and 6 years to get a license to be an interior designer, and that's the average of all the states.
So you're
So
telling
that's
me you can become a licensed plumber in less time than an interior designer?
yeah. So it's like you guys are saying, the regulations, it basically keeps people from getting a job. It's like if I wanted to be an interior designer, I gotta have 6 years of education.
You don't
To,
need, no offense, but you don't need any licensing to cut hair. I'm
yeah,
sorry, but you don't. Because if you're not good at your job, you're not going to be in business very long.
yeah,
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. That's
yeah.
exactly right. There is a really cool, my connection's being funky. Yours might be faster. It's called The Inverted Pyramid by Institute for Justice.
Is that right there?
Let's see.
Oh, on the ball.
Yeah.
So yeah,
oh,
we got a
What?
pyramid here. It says a hierarchy of alternatives to licensing. So I don't know if we just want to go through these or.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of it is that, for some people they think we're all trying to get to this outcome of safety and public health. So public health and safety is a big
Mhm.
thing people talk about with licensing. And so this is a way of showing somebody these are tons of ways that you can regulate or alternatives to licensing, like Greg was saying, a Yelp review.
Mhm.
The fact that if you screw something up,
Yeah.
you have a review out there, and so that's going to be at the top, and then it goes all the way down to the most strict, most highest regulation is licensure, and there's
Mhm.
everything else there in between.
Yeah, so here's the things that are in between market competition and licensures for those who are just listening. We got market competitions on top of the best alternative to licensing. Then it goes quality service self-disclosure, voluntary third-party professional certification and maintenance, voluntary bonding or insurance.
And there's
And
kind of a line on those too, that
Uh-huh.
says voluntary or non-regulatory. So those are all ones that are just voluntary options, ones
Yeah.
that you can choose to cover yourself.
Then we have private causes of action, deceptive trade practice acts. These are government interventions now. Inspections, mandatory bonding or insurance, registration, state certification, and the bottom one is licensure.
So like
So
doctors aren't, there's like private licensure and that, but you don't have like state licenses for doctors.
mhm.
Like there's a lot of industries, I should say, not doctors. There's a lot of industries where you have other certifications that
Mhm.
determine if you can be a CRNA.
Mhm.
That determines that. So there's a lot of ways that they figured that out, how to test for aptitude. But there are a lot of licensed occupations in
Yeah.
Dakota and other places that, like, it's cosmetology, I think, is the one where you have continuing education credits, but you pay $20 a year to keep your license going. There are some where it's only the money that you pay every year to keep the licensure going, but you haven't
Yeah.
actually shown any proficiency at all.
Yeah. Well, so it looks like we lost Greg. Just kidding.
I have two cool story. One's a terrible story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
One's a good story. Down in Iowa, there was a guy. This is a good story, I guess. There was a guy, William Burt. He went to prison. He came out. He decided to go back to school. He wanted to serve people in like shut-ins or just in places where they weren't, they were kind of away from everybody. So kind of went into these places with a mobile barbershop, and at
Yeah.
some point found out, after he'd gone back to school and gotten this degree and whatever else, opened up his mobile barbershop, that you can operate a mobile barbershop in Iowa because of some piece of regulation. So he came on and started working with Americans for Prosperity in Iowa, and then they started finding that they could have that broader occupational licensing conversation. They eventually got it fixed, and he was able to get back out there, but it took him a couple of years. And that's one way where you had somebody serving community.
Yeah.
It was making money, and we tried to shut it down. That's like their state shut it down.
Yeah.
And the second is a gal that was talking to us. She's here in South Dakota, and she does bridal hair, and her dad was kind of telling her, make sure you do this as a business. You really succeed
Yeah.
in this. She's young. She's an entrepreneur. She
Mhm.
started doing this as a business. She has a website, Facebook, all that. She got a call from somebody asking if she's licensed in cosmetology because she uses a straightener and a blow dryer.
Wow.
And a curling iron. So those two, because they're heat products,
Mhm.
require a cosmetology license. So hundreds of hours of school, thousands of hours of school actually for cosmetology, and you have to learn how to do nails. And she's like, I don't care about doing nails.
Yeah.
So we're holding back somebody who could do something really great. And we
Mhm.
did a hair braider carve out. And so now what we could do a curling iron carve out from the license. That is where, like, like you were saying earlier, Greg, enough of these baby steps, like just quick carving stuff out and just get rid of it. So the bill we're bringing is to have at least a review that says we're no longer are we just going to ignore that we have all of this regulation out there, or at least forces the legislature to say every 5 years we're going to have gone through every occupation and we're going to determine what should be sunsetted and what shouldn't. So it's just a very small step, and it's just the basis for it with that movement towards I think the highest thing would be free choice. If you want to hire a plumber in your own home, you can do that, and we don't even have that option here.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that our tax dollars are paying people to call people doing hair and asking them if they do have used blow dryers and hair straighteners, and be like, oh well, you got to go get a license now, because you could burn somebody to death with your hair straightener there, and it's just not safe. We got to keep America safe.
And it probably wasn't somebody from the government. That's the craziest thing. It was probably somebody from within the industry.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. See, that's another example.
Competition.
See? Yep, the competition. We got this lady out here that doesn't have a license. She's taking our competition. We gotta use the government to go after her to get her license.
Because they all had to pay thousands of dollars. And all this schooling.
If I had to do it, she's got to too. See, I think that's like the worst excuse to use. Like, well, I had to pay all this money, so I think other people should have to do the same punishment that I had to. It's like, no, like, we're never going to make the state and this country better if we have that kind of attitude with everything. It's just not going to work out.
And you would have nothing powerful enough to stop somebody that had a good idea except for with government. Like, government's a tool. You should make t-shirts for the Libertarian Party that just says government is a tool.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. But so that's another area. I mean, it's a micro step. There needs to be more, but it's like we've sat there in South Dakota and carved out. Okay, for a plumber, if you do plumbing in your own home, it's okay. And then the next year they did it with electricians and the hair braiders and now curling irons. And you can keep doing that until you finally get to a place where you say, not only are we not helping people that want to be entrepreneurs, but now we are stopping services that we could be getting freely in South Dakota. So she suffers, but all of her clients down the road suffer because now they can't get an affordable service.
This is from the National Conference of State Legislators. They say, let's see here, that occupational licenses are especially problematic for low-income individuals, people with criminal records, members of the military and their spouses, and immigrants with work authorization. In 2017, Ryan Nunn wrote, excessive licensing imposes costs on a wide variety of distinct groups, including people with criminal records, immigrants, military families, low-skilled workers, and entrepreneurs, not to mention consumers. According to Nunn, an inflexible vision on how work should be organized has needlessly prevented individuals with criminal records, military veterans, and others from entering licensed professions. The burdens facing specific worker populations are summarized below. So it says, it's the active duty, military, veterans, and spouses. Says, licensing requirements make it difficult for the 360,000 service members who leave or retire from active duty, guard, and reserve service each year from entering occupations that they may be qualified to practice. Licensing is a burden for the highly mobile population of military spouses, 1/3 of whom work in occupations that require licenses and certification. Compared to civilians, military spouses are 10 times more likely to have moved across state in the last year, making it difficult and costly for them to obtain a new license every time they move to a new state. The obstacles may deter military spouses from participating in the labor market altogether.
You know what's really interesting with that too is there's a huge, one thing you'll hear within occupational licensing conversations is reciprocity. So they'll say, well, if we allow for this, so you heard two things, I should say. I'm trying to remember what the bill looked like, but they did one for military spouses. They did one for military spouses a couple of years back within the South Dakota legislature. So I don't remember exactly what it looked like, but that's one area you hear. And then you also hear reciprocity with either with military families or with some certain professions. is that,
Mhm.
well, if we have a pact or whatever, if this and this and this state, we will honor their licensure and they'll honor ours. And now there's actually a universal one too, where some states are starting to say we are going to recognize licensing in any other state.
Yeah, that'd be a good step, incremental step forward. Let's see. It goes on to say immigrants with work authorization. The current licensure system deters skilled immigrants with work authorization from working jobs for which they have experience and training, hampering their ability to contribute their skills to the U.S. economy. While 30% of working-age immigrants had a college degree in 2010, research suggests that costly and duplicative licensing requirements make it difficult for skilled immigrants with work authorization to find employment that uses their skills. People.
LSS actually talked about licensing once for that reason.
Mhm.
LSS wouldn't, like, the thing with AFP is you work with, and I think for libertarians, like, you work with anybody to do good. So if you're on the same
Yeah.
page and you're both civil, then you can have those partnerships. Well, LSS, that's one thing I remember them talking about, is how, you know, licensing or different things will impact the immigrants that come in. Everyone's talking about how they want immigrants to have a job,
Mhm.
you know, and we should, because people should be able to succeed. For
Yeah.
some people, that's what they need to be able to hear, to say that somebody is a productive member of society. And if that's what they have to hear, like if that's what they have to see, then give them an open door to do so.
Mhm. Let's see. People with criminal records. In 2016, economist Stephen Slavinsky found that having a good job reduces the likelihood that a former offender will recidivate. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at pronouncing words. Individuals with recidivate.
Recidivate? Now I can't say it either. Recidivate.
Individuals with a criminal record are more likely to succeed and less likely to reoffend if they have a job. However, people with a criminal record, 1/3 of all Americans. Wow, can you believe that? We're supposedly the freest country in the world, but 1/3 of our population has a criminal record. That's absolutely insane. And what is it, like half of the country are children? So,
Well, it's like I was going to mention you in that story you talked about earlier about that. What did you say? It was a 6th grader or something with the BB gun.
yeah, 4th grader.
4th grader, yeah, and like the freaking state was like, we're not going to take this off of your permanent record.
Mhm.
It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? A permanent record? He's like 10 years old, man.
Whatever, it's China with social credit scores now. Like, come on, get real. Like, you go try to apply for a loan and you're like 20. It's like, oh, looks like you had a BB gun on your Zoom meeting in 4th grade. Yeah.
I can remember people talking about a permanent record growing up, but I just always assumed that was fake. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean a permanent record? Like, first of all, you can't talk about minors once they're 18. So what do you mean a permanent?
Mhm.
You're saying somebody can literally get online and like look up what I did in 5th grade?
Yeah.
I mean, man, technology is definitely getting there to where I'm sure that's possible in the future.
But do you think, I don't know this. I don't actually know the answer to this at all. Are there some, Greg, that will follow from, are there any, like, is there a carve out of like, this law is so bad, it will follow from their juvenile to their adult? Is it only if they're tried as an adult? I don't actually know the answer to this.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about that either. I want to say South Dakota, we assume that because you turn 18, stuff's sealed. But I think in South Dakota, unless you actually go to court and have the record sealed, it's not actually sealed.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it could be.
So
It's bad.
Okay, so this goes on to say 1/3 of Americans have a criminal record and can be denied an occupational license in half the states, regardless of whether the criminal record relates to the job they're seeking or how long ago the conviction occurred. As shown in the figure 325, I think that's the one right here. States require a direct connection between the type of license being sought and the applicant's criminal history, stating why the offense would disqualify the applicant, while the other 25 states and Washington, D.C. lack such standards. The American Bar Association found that 27,000 state occupational license restrictions for former offenders, such as provisions that list good moral character as a requirement for obtaining a license.
And that's the good
So,
moral
see,
character clause. Is like,
relevant standards in place is dark blue. Let's see, South Dakota's light blue, so we have no standards in place. That's good then, right?
it's not something we started like fighting for because we haven't seen that in there.
Mhm.
Like Michigan, go up to Michigan once. What does it say for Michigan?
Oh.
Because I know they just fought something. I don't.
Michigan has relevance standards in place.
Because they just fought a big thing last year, and I don't remember what happened. But
Oh.
one of the hugest. Oh, go ahead, Devin. I'm
No,
sorry.
you go ahead.
No, this is a good. You got a good part here.
I was just gonna keep reading. I don't have anything to comment on. But
Well,
let's see. Yeah,
I
go,
would just
Greg.
say, I would just say rather than read, we don't really need, when you think about a state license, an occupational license, all that really is just a tax. Because I've worked my previous job, I was a welder for 8 years, and now I'm a medical coder. And in both of those industries, although I don't need a license to operate or to be either one of those things,
Yeah.
they have private forms. As a welder, you can become AWS certified from the American Welding Society, and by taking a couple tests and paying your annual dues or whatever, you get your license. Essentially, it's not a state issued, but it is a form of certification and standardization. And then in 2018, I went to school to become a medical coder. And so again, there's a group called AAPC, and that's who I have my certification through. But again, they're not government organizations. I'm not paying dues or taxes to the government. These are just private organizations that set standards in those industries, and then it's up to the employer to decide if that's a qualification. It's like, so in South Dakota, because again, it's not really a union state, you don't really need an AWS certification to become a welder. At most, and I would just guess probably 90% of all shops, welding shops in South Dakota, you do not need an AWS certification to get a job. But like that medical coding, though, that's kind of a whole different ball game. To get a job, I did need to get that certification. But again, these aren't through the government. It's not a tax I'm paying through the government. It's all voluntary. It's up to the business to require, if they want to require you to have it or not.
Have you found problems like with so would you still prefer like a private certification? I mean, there's probably obvious answers, but what's the benefit of a private certification to a government certification?
Well, again, it's kind of voluntary.
Yep.
It's voluntary because I even like I said, medical coding. It's definitely a lot harder. Pretty much, I'd say 90% of the jobs I've seen are going to require you to have some sort of certification.
Yeah.
But there are jobs out there, and it is not a requirement. If somebody was willing to hire you to do or train you to do the job, and you never had a certification,
Yep.
that's up to the employer. That's not some government mandate.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Because you can opt out. Like with government licensing, you can't opt out. You could say, I want to hire my friend to do this, but if your friend got caught, like that would be a huge thing for them. But the other two is, I bet that those private certifications can pivot pretty fast. Like I bet if there's an issue, they can pivot pretty quickly. Where you have like government, that's extremely slow. If there's a problem with their licensing, that would be another benefit I could see with that private. So that was a really good point, though, that you can opt out.
Oh, speaking of, you guys do have your podcasting licenses, right? Otherwise, probably gonna have to sign out in this podcast.
I think I applied for some FCC license or something.
Get the federal and the state one and your county license, right?
Yeah, because you can hurt somebody on here.
I tell you what, maybe we should regulate podcasts.
I mean, my computer's getting kind of hot streaming this. Man, it's like a blow dryer.
We should lobby Congress to introduce a podcasting legislation.
Yeah, like
so we
now that
can
we
get
have-
rid of the
Get
rid
rid
of
of the competition. Like, let's get
Yep.
rid of internet warlords. Let's get rid of baseball tyranny and America and beer podcasts. Let's just close the doors and just make sure we're the only libertarian podcast in South Dakota. I mean, I think that's just the way to go forward. Government's looking out for us, basically. So
Basically.
you know, you embrace it.
Yeah. You can't get the wrong people in there, Devin. Send in Devin and Greg to protect the people.
It's all about getting the right dictator in there.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. It's just one. There's nothing wrong with the position itself. But that's a huge point. And the thing is, like, the people that run the licensing boards in South Dakota, like, those are the ones determining the licensing restrictions and things like that. They're oftentimes, I shouldn't say 100%, but from the industry, like, itself.
And what I want to know is, do the people in the licensing board, are they licensed to give out license? Because
who licenses the licensee?
Like, I want to make sure they're licensed too, because I don't trust them if they're not licensed.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
and then we need to license the people giving out the license to the licensing board. It's just never, like, we all need to have a license to be safe.
Well, that's so. The interesting thing with the occupational licensing bill is that one version of the bill actually creates like a separate, like, one has the legislature determine, the different boards approach them and they make the determination. But some version of the law that we were going to bring last year, very barely brought that in last year, and we're bringing it this year, that sunset review, that there's just stuff in there that people dispute. In terms of, I'm trying to think, because it was different in Nebraska, like there being a separate board in the model legislation over that like would oversee it. Well, you can't like create different new parts of government, things like that. Like, you can't create bureaucracy. So, and then you are kind of putting it back on the legislators because they're the lawmakers, and it would just be like federal government saying this bureaucratic agency is going to make the determination instead of me, the lawmaker, making the law. So that in South Dakota, it stays with the legislators. I'm 99% sure with the process that we're looking at. But there's a story after story of like where people succeed so well outside that realm of government control. And so this is one area where people don't understand licensing, because when we start to talk about it, people go, like when we did the legislative preview, Don heard from somebody pretty shortly after. So people get worried about negative outcomes, that we're not regulating these industries and stuff. But when you look at actual outcomes, like we talked about education, it's usually a far better outcome because the cost of the service comes down. You mentioned that. It's better for the consumer. Yeah, it's better for low income because they can actually break into a profession. They don't have to have so much money. It's better for immigrants. It's better for
Military families.
Yeah, military families. So some people just have different ways around it. They want to do. There's even like federal versus state. So both Obama and Trump administration have both mentioned occupational licensing. The difference is Obama administration mentioned occupational licensing at the federal level. And one of probably the coolest thing I've done so far with AFP was in March, we got to go out to Washington and meet with the Trump administration in the White House, in one of the like White House building meeting rooms, and talk to them about occupational licensing, because that was going to be a big thing for them, but they weren't looking to do a lot of it at the federal level. It was a priority for them. It's actually like one of Ivanka's things, but it was a priority for them to go to the different states and say, here's a thing we put together for the governors to push through in their state. This is what we think brings better outcomes for you. So, but they weren't.
Geez, what happened with that?
Okay, so this is what's
because if Trump handed Noem a packet and said, "I need this passed," he probably it's a done deal.
Yeah, I got you, Don.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big. Oh gosh, you guys, I did a thing with my father-in-law on a boat with Trump, and they were singing this song called Big Don. I'm sorry that I told you about it. I picked it up, and I apologize ahead of time.
You're gonna have to sing it for us now.
I just did, and I'm sorry for it. It's stuck in your head, and I care about you. I'm not going to do it again. Don't go back and listen to it.
Oh, we just lost all our viewers. Way to go, Lisa. Way to go.
But so he, the guy that we were talking to was saying, Pence is about to go out to talk to these different states with this stuff, but this COVID thing came up because this was it's like March 3rd, and they were like, Pence is doing this thing around COVID, but as soon as that's done, he's going to get back out to the states. So they thought it would be like a month, like we just got to get rid of this pesky COVID thing, and in a month we'll be back out there talking to the states. So obviously they never went back to it. But I can send it to you because we got some information there, like a one-pager. But the Trump administration has like a whole thing on occupational licensing, and they were at least saying to do it at the state level. So you have to be like, I don't know. For the most part, you should be able to see that in other states when they relaxed licensing. This is what happened. So at the federal level, it'll probably be tighter than it should be.
Okay, well, let's lead this last little section here from the National Conference of State Legislators. Low income and unemployed workers, how this affects them. Licensing is especially costly to low income Americans and unemployed or dislocated workers. It's a big thing right now in 2020. Who may lack resources to pay for the necessary education and training, as well as licensing fees and other licensing costs. The Institute for Justice's 2012 License to Work report found that states impose licensing burdens and costs on low-income occupations. For example, in Arizona, licenses average $450 in fees, 599 training days, and are required for 64 low-income jobs, according to Veronique de Rugi of George Mason University's Mercedes Center. By placing barriers to entry on jobs that could otherwise be performed by low-income individuals, these states remove the bottom rung of the ladder of opportunity for the citizens who need it most. Yeah,
because if you don't have a job, you don't have $450 to pay.
Yeah, and you have to wait 2 years. You have to wait till 2023 just to start.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to say about the government. The government creates the problem, and then their solution to the high cost of the training and the regulation would be to loan you money that you otherwise wouldn't need. You know what I mean? It's like that's their solution. It's like, well, geez, these occupational licenses, the costs are too much, and school costs are getting out of control. Well, what can we do about it? Well, we'll just give them more money instead of eliminating the issue.
Which is exactly what they're doing in healthcare too. So I won't go crazy into healthcare because there's so much, that's like a whole other thing. But that's what they're finding in healthcare too, is that we sit there and we keep throwing money at, with insurance companies, or we throw money at, we're talking about Medicaid expansion now. And that's something where Jorgensen did a really good job of explaining. Auto insurance companies don't cover gas. And if they did, you wouldn't know what gas station to go to. You wouldn't make that decision. It would be
there'd be no competition between the gas stations to lower the prices.
Yeah, and you wouldn't even be aware of what they are. So that's what happens in healthcare. That's what happens in all these other areas that we just don't even know. What that is, and so we just continue to pay these crazy increasing costs. And so, but that's
I actually just got my bill. Because I'm a contract employee, so I don't have insurance through my company. And after you've been working there long enough, you can get it, but it's so astronomical that you wouldn't even buy it anyways. So I just got my bill from a medical visit I had a month ago, and $150 out of pocket without insurance. Now that's not terrible. My wife's actually went to a different place in Yankton before, where the first visit was like $100, $120, and then every visit after that was like $60.
Oh.
Because once you're an established patient, it's actually cheaper to see you. But at some point, I think we need to get back to the catastrophic coverage because that's what I need if you were to get hospitalized. But I don't need coverage to go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I don't even need coverage for the couple prescription meds that I get. They're not that expensive. You can, because I can remember a couple years ago when I was working my welding job that, what happened to Devin? But anyway,
We are losing people. Bye, Devin.
a couple years ago, when I was working that welding job, that after the Obamacare raised prices over the course of them years, it was going to cost like $500-$600 a month just for me and my wife to have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And when our kid was under 18 and still living with us, family insurance would have been $800 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you just kind of do the math on all that, and it's like I don't spend $800 a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The only time it even comes close to that is if something catastrophic happens.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody happens to be, and I don't think that it's a good idea to go without insurance. That's not what I'm saying, but
Yeah.
The prices have gotten ridiculous.
Yeah.
And unless your employer is subsidizing it, or unless government is subsidizing it, the prices are out of control.
Yeah, that's actually, I love Jorgensen's thing with that because she basically says, like, we think the opposite of the single payer system is the free market system, which is insurance companies. And she goes, I'll tell you right now, that's not the free market system. That's just more of that bureaucracy. But
yeah, I thought Jorgensen, that was one of her really good talking points was when she would compare, the insurance, buying insurance, compare it to the car insurance. Like you wouldn't pay attention if somebody was just paying this for you.
So that insurance thing's huge, but also just the idea that more regulation means less innovation. And so not only are we not aware of the prices anyway, but number two, like because we're not aware of them, they continue to go up, and we don't allow a lot of innovation, or we don't incentivize innovation for them to go down. So when COVID hit, that was one of the biggest things is take down the regulation. So one of the biggest things we saw in South Dakota or other places is telemedicine. With telemedicine, there were so many regulations around it. It wasn't, you could use it, but it wasn't all that convenient. And now you have telemedicine everywhere because you actually can. In counseling and therapy, the scale, I know Dan was saying that it's like the Wild West of telemedicine, and it's so there's so many good outcomes because you don't have all the bureaucracy around it. So more people can access this, telemedicine. And right now, people don't want to leave their homes, and it's been better for that.
It's cheaper for the providers too.
Yeah, that too. And it had to be relaxed in executive orders from our governor in the state. Like they did some stuff at the U.S. Senate level, and then here too, and found out that actually works really well for people. So some of the things when we're talking about Medicaid expansion, we don't think that's the answer. Because it actually usually hurts people on Medicaid that need to see a doctor, and now you have overcrowding happening because you've expanded Medicaid to able-bodied, working groups. So because of that, we're pushing for some positive alternatives. So like one of the things you said there, Greg, there's something called direct primary care. So that's a healthcare model where you do have almost like a subscription with a primary care provider. And there'd be some barriers to that in statute in South Dakota, but those kind of things can be fixed. So that's one of the things is less regulation, the more innovation, and then the cost of healthcare comes down for everybody and not just the people who are on insurance or government programs.
Yeah, another one I've kind of heard a lot about, or I've heard it advertised. I've looked into it a little bit as they have like these, they're religious based, but they're like share programs. So instead of actually being insurance, it's like 1 million people pay into this system, and then that system just pays out on whatever bills come in. But they're they're religious organizations because they get some kind of exemptions that nobody else does, type of deal. They kind of got big under the Obamacare mandate when there was the mandate, because this is a way cheaper option, but it counted as insurance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's always a loophole with government.
What do you call them, Greg?
They're like share plans,
Yeah.
meta share, or
Okay.
they just share the cost over their, whatever, subscribers. Whatever. It's essentially what insurance does anyways,
Yeah, that's a big point. I mean, there's a lot of alternatives to that too that we don't even look into, especially when you have mandates like that just kind of kill some of the competition.
I'm guessing they're nonprofit too. They don't.
Yeah, probably. In South Dakota, so in Sioux Falls, all of a sudden we have these like private labs and right here. Oh, whoops. Hi, sorry, I had a technical issue. I didn't have my laptop plugged in. Chad set up a nice little area for me here, you guys. I just want to make sure people can appreciate that. When I came in, I asked him to put this fireplace in here. So I got the fireplace going, and then when I walked in, there also was the leg lamp.
Nice, very homey.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, I remember where it went before that, but I just had to stop.
That's a Rocky Horror Picture Show lamp, right? Is that what that's
Christmas
from?
Story, isn't it?
Yeah, from Christmas Story.
Oh, Christmas Story. Wrong movie.
Next time I'll put stuff out from that. But anyways, I can't remember. Oh, yeah. Basically, I was talking about regulation. I can't remember it specifically because that distracted me.
What was it my wife was talking about? Sorry. Because you were talking about your leg lamp. But there was something she was saying you could get. Oh, it was some car dealership in Sioux Falls that if you bought a car, you got either a leg lamp or a $300 Best Buy gift card. And we were kind of joking because it was like, I think I'd take the gift card. Who's taking that leg lamp? Well, we figured out who's taking it.
We would take the leg lamp. It's a major award. That's the line, so you have to say that line. But I think they're pretty expensive, so that's a good deal.
Oh, breaking news! This just in: leg lamp sales are through the roof right now. Must be tuning in.
Audience. That's probably another reason we should be regulated on this thing.
You have a license for that leg lamp, though, right? You know, it could be kind of dangerous if you have a lamp that's made out of a leg and you don't have a license.
All over. There's a scene from the movie where he just there's that little kid. I think it's Rafi that's doing it, but he just rubs the leg. I've seen.
And that's what turns it on.
That went from licensing to healthcare, but same thing. It's the same idea. It's the same philosophy. Obviously, is that. We've seen clear enough outcomes. The more you put around people, the less options they have, and the less wealth they can create, and the less we can lift society up. So it doesn't have to be like the oligarchy. You could actually take that government lid off of people, and maybe it's not just a government barrier. Maybe there's internal barriers, or maybe there's barriers in society. Whatever it is, government should be one part of this 4-part approach to really taking those barriers off people so that they can do things that they're capable of doing. That people are capable of incredible things. So that I was going to say something about a book, but you can't close out podcasts talking about a book.
Yeah, you can.
That was our longest podcast ever.
Yeah.
Would be like if we were just sitting together talking and having a beer. So I feel like that was they're lucky we got it done in 2.5 hours. But it was fun. It felt like just sitting around with you guys talking. But there's just a lot of opportunity. I appreciate just the space to talk about stuff too, because I love the shared goals. I mean, AFP is not they're not aligned with party but also,
that makes sense. They gotta be an independent organization.
but these issues, these issues that we're talking about are things that free people up. So the book I was going to mention was called Believe in People. And it's good because it just talks about story after story of people that when they were given the right opportunities and they had that lid taken off for them, then they were able to have better outcomes. Totally forgot to put my Christmas sweater on, you guys. I make sure I have that on before we go. But the partnership between I think having a party or a group of people or just a group of libertarians, whatever it be, actually making a difference in the issues in the state is a huge opportunity. So I'm super excited that you guys are talking about actual issues, because that is how you accomplish that stuff. I think you can accomplish stuff through a party for sure. But I think you can accomplish stuff through like engaging on those issues and then empowering people that have barriers put on them. You guys are doing incredible work. I want to make sure I end. You guys
Well, thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. And yeah, that's what we're here for, is talk about these issues and get the word out, raise awareness on what's going on, and hopefully we can slowly but incrementally get things changed for the better. And give people more freedom and trust freedom as a mechanism to resolve a lot of the issues that we're facing as a society. Is there anything else anybody wants to talk about before we finish the podcast? I know we have some other topics Lisa might want to cover, but we're kind of pushing it a little late. I don't know if you want to talk about Section 230 or not. We can maybe do that in the next episode or something. Yeah, totally up to you, Lisa.
I felt like Greg was going to say something. I didn't want to interrupt him.
Well, not if you want to talk about something else.
No, I was going to say, let's do it another time, but let's for sure. Because I think that's like, you could have a few people on for that too. Like you could have a rowdy discussion. There are a lot of people that think that it's so necessary. So Section 230 is a thing that allows for internet freedoms. And we'll talk about it another time, not this time. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I think you'll have both the two old parties pushing for the issue, but also corporations, different things. Media will push for it because of how many people have found that they have a voice outside of mainstream media. So there's just a whole lot of people that are going to be calling for these regulations. And it's a thing that allows us to sit here and have a podcast and have people comment on it, like Tom and Bobby. So you guys are just doing really good work. I won't talk on any other topics, but we could do Section 230 and we touched on healthcare. So there's opportunities to get involved in the healthcare side, just so you guys can do AFP. And I'm just really proud of the work you guys are doing. That's how I'll end it. You guys, I'm just
thank you.
I appreciate everything.
Well, thank you. I just want to end it with thanking you for coming on and speaking with us. Also, just want to wish everyone out there watching a Merry Christmas this week. And happy holidays if you don't celebrate Christmas. Happy Hanukkah and all the other things out there.
Yeah, and make sure to tune in to episode 5. We'll be having Colin Duprell on. He's the West River coordinator for the Libertarian Party of South Dakota. And we'll be talking about the top things that Trump can do before he leaves office.
Do you think you guys will go 2.5 hours with Colin? He's pretty
let's see. Oh, we got one more comment. J.M. Peter says, I found you. Thanks for finding us.
He's in a band called Southside Pine, so
I think we need to start calling all the people that watch the show Watchdogs too.
Yeah.
So we could be like, for all the watchdogs out there.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Greg.
Happy holidays.
We gotta do something dog related, like keep biting.
Hog dogs. For all the hog dogs out there.
Exactly.
Keep biting that tire.
If you think of that Cheech and Chong, where their dogs are running after cars,
But yeah, be sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and let's see, we'll get a final quote here from our Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg. I don't believe I have committed any crimes.
Devin, your intro.
That haircut is a crime.
Does he have a license for that haircut? I don't know. But thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be here next Sunday, and we hope you'll call in and discuss some of the things that Trump can do before he leaves office. I know we'll be talking about pardoning Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, maybe Ross Ulbricht. And if you want to call in, you have some other things to suggest, yeah, definitely do that. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, guys.
See ya.